They're calling it an administrative misstep, but are UCF fans happy with Terry Mohajener's explanation for the infamous email that went out to over 600 people?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me is my good friend, college football analyst extraordinaire, Jake Crane from Crane & Co. over at the Daily Wire. Jake, thanks for joining me. Let's jump right into this. UCF sent out an email to their season ticket holders saying, hey, we see that you've been really active on the secondary market with your tickets. And we encourage season ticket members to resell or transfer tickets through their UCF Athletics account manager page, blah, 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 right? They went on to say that, look, if this keeps up, it could result in loss of season tickets. UCF ticket holders, alums, fans, anybody who held season tickets responded in mass on social media saying this is absolute crap. This is tone deaf. And at the end of the email, you have the nerve to ask me for money after saying I can't do what I want with my tickets for a program, Jake, trying to drum up support for a new coach. This was a misstep. This was a misstep. It was tone deaf. Now, the Terry Mohajener has responded, and I want to read this, and then we'll get into it. He says, "Dear Knight Nation, I want to acknowledge that we missed the mark yesterday in clearly communicating with some season ticket holders. The email was intended to reach only those accounts who purchased season tickets with the sole intent to resell. Unfortunately, the email went to 600 accounts, some of which were misidentified as ticket brokers. For those of you who received the email from our ticket office, I apologize for any confusion it has caused. To be clear, no season ticket holder is losing their seats or discounts. Our intent is to prioritize our dedicated fans by offering upgrade opportunities to those who have actively used their tickets before potential brokers, while also accommodating as many fans as possible from our 2,500 seat wait list. As the stadium evolves, we want UCF fans in our best seats. Thank you again for being an essential part of the UCF family. In the meantime, if you have any additional questions, contact us." Is this good enough? Like, is it good enough to say, oops, we only meant to send this to ticket brokers, but we sent it to regular season ticket holders? What is this, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody makes mistakes. I'm a pretty decently forgiving person, but you don't need to then lie to me and say, "Oh, well, we only meant to send this to certain." No, you didn't. Like, because if you meant to do that, that's a very specific thing that takes a lot of conscious thought at the time to say, "Hey, this could be inflammatory if this was sent to people who it doesn't need to be sent to. Make sure we only send it to this certain group of people." That's not what you did. You sent it to everybody. Don't hit me with, "Oh, you were texting another girl, but you meant to send that to me." That's what it seems like. Just come out to me. Okay, there's a couple things. One, first off, I'm buying the tickets, so I'm going to decide what I want to do with the tickets that I bought that are now mine. If I go buy a hot dog, you don't tell me then to go do what I'm going to do with the hot dog. If I want to eat the hot dog I bought, I'll eat it. If I want to give it to my son or daughter or wife, I will. If I want to give it to a homeless guy, I'll
Yeah.
do that because I bought the hot dog. So it was tone deaf from the start. And you brought up, situational awareness. You're trying to get a lot of positivity. You're trying to drum up support. And why, if you were going to send that email out, would you not say, "Hey, look, if you're going to sell your season tickets, can you at least make an effort to sell them to UCF fans first? And if that doesn't work out, okay," instead of threatening the people? I just feel like it missed on so many levels, but you could have saved it. If it was me and I was the AD at UCF, I would have sent out an email apologizing, saying, "Hey, obviously that was a tone deaf remark. Where we're at right now, we want as many people as possible. We appreciate you buying it, and it could be worse." And I'd have a picture of Illinois unveiling Terrence Shannon Jr.'s jersey hanging in the rafters upside down. I would have tried to turn it into something funny, or at least have some humor about it. So yeah, just I think you kind of compounded a mistake with another mistake because you tried to lie and say you didn't mean to send that to everybody. You meant to send it to everybody. You just didn't like the backlash. And I would not be shocked at all if one of the first people to reach out after this was sent and the backlash started was Scott Frost.
Jake Crane, king of the analogies. I love the text analogy. Baby, what that booty do? Oh, sorry, that was from my boy Chris.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Mom. Didn't mean to send that.
I agree with you. I think honesty is the best policy, but I think that Scott Frost probably was mortified. You raise a good point. Seeing something like that go out, and remember, this is a guy who's been at UCF before. He has a special connection to this fan base, and he wants butts and seats. I don't think he cares much who's reselling their seats as long as there are people there, Jake. That's what should matter the most, shouldn't it?
Yeah, especially when you're trying to recruit early, right? And you bring up the North Carolina game that's at home. The last thing I want is for my first big test at home for there to be some sort of boycott or that 30% of the fan base is upset because somebody hit the wrong sent the wrong email, supposedly to everybody else. So I mean, that's part of being the head coach. You got to monitor every aspect of it, and attendance is huge, right? Not only from a revenue generating standpoint, but when you have recruits show up for big games, you want them to know they're going to be playing in front of the biggest atmosphere possible. So yeah, I mean it's a cleanup on aisle night.
Yeah. Look, the way I see this, and you and I, we both been in corporate America, so we know. When mistakes like this happen, usually somebody's getting fired.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody's being held accountable for why the send button got hit on something like this for an audience that it was never intended for. It is a significant misstep. Now, I'm not advocating for anybody to lose their job.
I am.
And this,
if I'm Scott Frost, I want to know either the person who thought this was a good idea and wrote the email like this, or the person who's not smart enough to send it to the right people.
Yeah. But yeah, ultimately, some changes need to happen internally. So something like this just doesn't happen again. Again, you've just hired a new coach, and for all intents and purposes, we talked about this week after week. He's building a lot of enthusiasm and support for the program just on his hire alone, Jake. They're donating NIL dollars, and where people choose to spend their money, because as consumers, right? We talk with our money, Jake. Like if I don't believe, if you're saying crap I don't believe in, I'm not going to spend money with you. Period.
Yeah. Well, if this happened during a game, we'd call this an unforced error. Like what did DJ Khaled say? Congrats, you played yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. But hey, look, mistakes happen. UCF is attempting to move on from it. Time will tell whether fans accept this explanation by AD Terry Mohajner or not. But look, they've got to move on, and they've got to recruit, and they've got to recruit in the state of Florida. Can UCF win the state of Florida? We'll talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with a pile of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to TurboTax expert who match your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. All this while you go about your day. Only available with TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates only on the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantee. Recruiting is the lifeblood of college football. Scott Frost has got a task in front of him. He's got to take a 4-win football team, and he's got to convince recruits that UCF is a place to start and finish your career in today's college football. You and I both know Florida is one of the hottest recruiting beds in the country. Back in the day, we had a saying about all the speed came out of Florida. Florida was known for producing the fastest athletes in the country. You're up against kind of a resurgent Miami. Look what Billy Napier was able to do with Florida, exceeding any expectation with what a lot of people thought was the hardest schedule we've ever seen in college football history. If you're UCF, how do you get in position to tell recruits, look, forget Miami, forget Florida, come build your career with Scott Frost at UCF?
Well, I think you got to be realistic about, who you are, and obviously where you are. And Florida being a hotbed of talent, being really deep from a high school talent standpoint helps. But I don't think UCF is ever going to get to a point where they're consistently, from at least a star or ranking standpoint, beating Florida State, Miami, and Florida. Now, you may beat one of them, you may beat two of them some years, but the odds of you becoming the top dog in the state from a brand standpoint, it's going to be tough. Now, you are in the Big 12. You are, quote unquote, Power Four now. So it does help in the pecking order a little bit.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean that you can't evaluate better than them. That doesn't mean that you can't develop better than them. That doesn't mean that you can't outdo them in the transfer portal. So there's ways for you to, maybe not from a ranking standpoint, dominate the state, but from a player development and evaluation standpoint, uh, you can get at least even with them, in some years exceed them. Now, what UCF does on the field, if all of a sudden they're making the college football playoff every year and they're able to kind of move up in that pecking order a little bit,
mm.
and Florida State's down or Miami's down, you may be able to, but that's a really long road, and I don't think UCF fans want to take the time to try and walk down that road just from a high school development standpoint. So I think it's got to be a blend of everything: evaluation, development, high school recruiting, and transfer portal. That's going to be the recipe for UCF to be able to put themselves in a position to compete for national championships.
Jake, UCF doesn't have a game scheduled with another team from the state of Florida
Yeah.
next year. Is this a significant misstep, I think, in the scheduling to not play your in-state peers?
Well, at least one of them. I think you should play one of them a year, or maybe one every other year. But I think a good out for UCF is, you're in the Big 12, right? So when you look at your travel schedule, where you are geographically, I think the only people that have a bigger argument than you is probably, Cal and Stanford being in the ACC, or maybe Oregon and USC and UCLA being in the Big 10. So I don't think it's something where UCF doesn't want to play any of those. But if I'm a Florida, and you look at Florida's schedule, it's hard to say that, oh, well, your schedule's soft. It's definitely not. I mean, Florida State plays Bama. You look at Miami, they typically play pretty good teams to start the year off. So I wouldn't put it as a must. But again, if you do want to move up in that pecking order, what is the best way to show recruits? By beating one of those teams and
Yeah.
saying, look, they can say whatever they want. We may not be the biggest brand yet, but we just pulled their pants down and spanked them in front of everybody in the high school.
Yeah, I think when you talk about recruiting, you talk about winning recruits in the state of Florida. They know. Oh, my buddy's going to Miami. I'm going to Florida. I think it is a point of pride to be able to play the schools that maybe even turned you down for a scholarship
Yeah.
in state, and do that in front of your friends and family in the state. This is so I do think it's a little bit of a misstep to an opportunity missed, because you've got high level programs in the state. You don't have to travel across the country. So from an expense standpoint, it should be a little bit of a no-brainer, but get
Well,
those games on the schedule.
yeah, and Mike, it's a two-way street, though. I mean, this may not be as much about UCF as it is about these other schools that
That's
are
true.
bigger brands that don't want to play them. And I know there is a much wider gap between Auburn and Alabama and UAB and Troy than what it
Yeah.
is between Miami, Florida State, and Florida and UCF. I'm not comparing UCF to UAB or Troy, but there's a reason Auburn and Alabama do not play UAB and Troy. There's
Yeah.
no upside. You're supposed to beat them, right? You're a bigger dog than they are. So if you beat them, well, congrats, you were supposed to. If you lose, then you kind of risk falling off a cliff a little bit and a lot of embarrassment. So I wonder how much it is on the other foot, to be honest with you, rather than UCF.
Yeah. Like, look, I think that when you're right. There has to be a trade-off. There has to be an even trade. Both sides need to get something if you're going to play that game. And if you're on the other side of it, you're just thinking, what do we gain from this? If we lose it, do we have more to lose than to gain by playing this
Yeah.
game? And if
Yeah.
you're UCF, I think it's incumbent on you to offer the other side of that coin, so that teams want to schedule that game and take on that challenge
Well,
and say, hey, come play us. We're
Well,
ready to
I
play
would
you.
make it known. If I was Scott Frost, I'd come out and say, hey, Florida, we're not afraid to play you. Hey, Florida State, we're not afraid to play you. Miami, we're not afraid to play you. So when they say no, they look like the weak
Yeah.
ones. They look like the scared ones. It's
Mm.
a PR battle, man.
Yeah.
Perception is reality. Maybe you don't want to play them for UCF, but you know they don't want to play you. So I want to be the first one to come out and be like, we're not scared, and then you look scared in front of everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's where your AD comes in, right?
For
And that
sure.
administration comes in, and then you get together and you game plan this and say, listen, guys, here's how we're going to build a winner. Let's issue the challenge as an
Yeah.
institution and say, look, we're not scared of anybody. We'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime. You set the date, and the UCF Knights are going to show up and kick your butt.
And that's the email you send to season ticket holders. That's the email you send.
Jake, you're my favorite guest by far. Look, fun stuff to talk about here. Jake Crane from Crane & Co. and Daily Wire. Can't stop laughing at that. But look, how high is the ceiling for UCF? We're going to talk about where they're ranked and where they need to be next on Locked On UCF. What's that ceiling like for UCF and Scott Frost? Right now, they are 78th in the 2025 recruiting rankings. Now, there are some coaches who feel like to build a sustainable winner, high school recruiting has to be the foundation that you build your program on. Yes, the portal can help you turn it quickly, but if we're talking about consistency, you got to get kids from high school in your program, Jake. You have to train them in your program. You have to develop them in your program, and you have to turn them into stars. And you use the portal to fill in gaps that you missed on, from your high school recruiting. Where does UCF need to be in this thing now that they're in the Big 12 to compete regularly? I would argue that there's not a lot of difference between the 6th ranked class and the 10th ranked class. Usually it's one recruit. It really comes down to who filled their needs better with the classes that they brought in. Now, we do see a little bit of jump when you start to get into the top, I think 1 to 4, where, you've got game-changing 5 stars in a lot of those recruiting classes.
Yeah.
But if you're UCF, is it good enough to just be inside the top 15 every year?
Well, I mean, I think if you're a UCF fan, if you can be inside the top 15 of high school recruiting every year, you take that in spades. Look,
Yeah.
UCF's never going to finish in the top 5 in recruiting in football. I'm sorry. It's just not the way it's going to work in the high school level. Now, that doesn't mean you can't end up with a top 5 to 7 roster if you do it right. And other coaches, they'll say, well, we need to be 70% high school, 30% transfer portal, or 50% and 50%. It depends on where you're at, really. Because,
Okay.
again, if you're at Georgia, you can say, hey, we can rely on high school recruiting more than other places and just fill holes in the ship with the transfer portal. If you're at a place like maybe UCF, where it's going to be tough for you to just dominate these other teams in high school recruiting, you need to take what I call the Neapolitan approach, which is 3-prong. One, obviously high school recruiting, 33%. Very, very important that you're able to do that. Second, the other 33%, the transfer portal. You need to win in the transfer portal. That's 66%. And then the other 33% is keeping your best players on the roster. Those are the 3 areas where you have to specialize in. So maybe you take a little less NIL that you would spend on a high school recruit and maybe keep that NFL safety that you got that's about to be a junior that Kirby Smart won't get off the phone with. So I
Yeah.
think it's about situational awareness and knowing where you are. It's just like anything with money when it comes down to NIL. Knowing where you're at will tell you how to spend. So if you're UCF, I don't think you say, well, Georgia does it this way, so we're going to do it this way. Or Bama does it this way, so we're going to do it this way. No, you've got to do it your own way. It needs to be a 3-pronged Neapolitan approach with the money. That's how I think you can get the most bang for your buck and be consistently good year after year.
Yeah, you mentioned something that we talk about a lot, and it's something I want to hit on to close this segment, and it's
Ice
re-recruiting
cream?
your.
Sorry.
It's re-recruiting your roster every year has become a challenge for these coaches in the portal. Not only do you have to get out and convince new recruits to come, you got to convince your current roster to come back. They've got some of these kids have agents, they're playing the field, they're testing their value on this NIL market and saying, hey, listen, if you want to keep me around, we need to renegotiate that initial deal because I feel like I've outperformed the contract. If you're Scott Frost, you're maybe telling the boosters, look, man, I need a budget for keeping my roster together every year.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. And that's coach's biggest complaint about the transfer portal is like, now I have to recruit my own guys to stay
Yeah.
and go out and find new guys and do this and do that. Now, some people say, well, you can go raid other rosters. Well, that's true, but it's still an extra chore. I mean, a made bed is better than anything at the end of the day, and I don't have to worry about it. But I will say, with UCF, I think it presents a little bit of a different challenge. And I'm not trying to say that UCF is a little dog or whatever, but it's a lot easier to talk somebody into staying at Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan. You have more leverage. If you're a running back at UCF, that's an incredible player, that's an NFL player, and Georgia's got a bigger budget than you, and it's in the SEC, and Kirby Smart comes calling, it's going to cost you more to keep him than it's going to cost Georgia to keep their starting running back there. So you find yourself in a unique challenge in having to do that. And UCF is a place where coaches will look at the end of the year at some of these bigger places and say, well, I mean, this guy was in the Big 12, was an all-conference corner for UCF. Why don't we go get him? We just lost our all-conference corner to the NFL. We've got a young guy underneath we need to develop, but let's get a mercenary and go down there to Central Florida and grab this kid. So it's a unique challenge that Scott Frost is going to have to be very smart with the way he divvies stuff out.
Yeah, look, he's going to have to be a very adept manager of many things in today's college football. I mean, we're at a place, Jake, where we're going to be talking about salary caps here pretty soon with the schools managing the NIL process more directly. Schools having to maybe deal with agents directly. They may have to develop whole departments to help manage what's coming for college football, just in trying to manage athletes. And then don't forget about the education portion of this. We used to say we're an educational institution and you come here to get an education and play football. But I'm not so sure that's going to be true here in the future.
It hadn't been true for a while. It's just like Jimbo Fisher said, NIL's been around a long time. Y'all just started hearing about it.
Yeah. I just I'm shocked at where it's going. We'll see. I think the schools that manage the process the best are the ones that are going to continue to rise to the top. If you're UCF, maybe this new process provides an opening for you to be one of those schools that rises to the top while other schools falter. Jake Crane from Crane & Co. over at the Daily Wire. I want to thank you for joining me today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Very easy. Just go to the Google machine on your phone or laptop or whatever device. I'm not smart enough to know what's new. It's CRAIN and Company. We're easy to find.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12 with our guy Drake Toll. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.